The views and opinions expressed on this podcast is solely of the creator and do not necessarily reflect the views, thoughts, or opinions of the listener. Listener discretion is advised. Chat, GPT, and AI technologies were not used or harmed in the creation of this podcast. It is solely 100% human-made by me, your host, Melanie, and this is Under the Moon Paranormal Presents Ohio Legends. Why is it called this? Why is it such a long title? Well, that's because I have a YouTube channel and a Facebook business page called Under the Moon Paranormal, and I decided to turn it into a podcast where I take an Ohio legend once a month under the full moon and bring you the facts, the history, and the ghost stories. And you can submit your own stories if you email me your story at underthemoonparapod@gmail.com. Welcome to the show. Hey guys, Melanie here. So if my Ohio accent doesn't bother you, we're going to get along great because I bring you the straight up facts, the history, and all that good stuff. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about November's full moon, which is called the Beaver Moon. It brings with a unique energy of symbolism. Falling on November 15th, 2024, this full moon represents preparation, diligence, and the gathering of resources, echoing from the industrious beavers that have readied themselves for winter. Astrologically, the Beaver Moon signifies a time to reflect, complete tasks, and prepare for what lies ahead. So this year's Beaver Moon is especially significant as it will be a supermoon. Okay? In the stable time, Taurus, promoting themes of groundedness, determination, and focus. This full moon marks a period of heightened emotions, introspection, and transformative growth. Appearing larger and brighter due to its proximity to the Earth, supermoon amplifies its energy, creating a potential time for breakthroughs, deep reflection, and practical decision-making. It encourages us to elevate our goals and work diligently towards achieving stability in both personal and professional aspects. Let's dive into the Beaver Moon's significance and its astrological meanings and how you can harness its energy for a spiritual growth this November 2024. The Beaver Moon's name originates from the Native American and early colonial traditions. In November, beavers become highly active, preparing for winter by building dams and gathering food. This was an ideal time for hunters to set traps before the winter froze everything. In 2024, the Beaver Moon reminds us to complete unfinished projects, secure resources, and prepare for the next coming months. Its energy emphasizes building a strong foundation for the future. And the spiritual essence of the Beaver Moon revolves around perseverance and hard work. It's a time to finish tasks and take stock of achievements and prepare for the future. So what can it mean for you? Completion and closure. The Beaver Moon 2024 is ideal for typing up those loose ends and closing chapters. If you've been delaying tasks, now is the time to complete them. Preparation for the winter. Just as beavers gather resources for the winter, this full moon urges you to prepare financially, emotionally, and spiritually for the next months ahead. Because guess what? It's the holidays. You're going to be stuck with your family, whether you like it or not. Foundation building. The full moon supports laying strong foundations for the future success, encouraging you to create stability in your life. So, let's talk a little bit about, I haven't done this before, so we're going to try this. This is a little bit new. Each sign and what the full moon means for you. Let's start with Aries, of course. Focus on career goals. This is a time for ambition and professional growth. I doubt it for me. But for other Aries, professional growth. All right. Taurus, strengthen personal relationships and resolve conflicts. Gemini, prioritize health and self-care. Cancer, use this energy to complete creative projects. Leo, Concentrate on home and family, improve your living space, and reconnect with loved ones. Virgo. Communication is key. Clear up misunderstandings. Libra. Focus on financial stability, assesses your financials, and plan ahead. Scorpio. With the Beaver Moon in your season, embrace transformation and release the past. Sagittarius. Turn inward with meditation and introspection to align your goals. Capricorn. Strengthen friendships and community ties. Aquarius. Seize career achievements, advancement opportunities. Pisces. Engage in spiritual growth by exploring new ideas and philosophies. Good luck out there. I hear there's a Mercury retrograde starting soon, so be prepared, my folks. Okay, so that is your full moon update. So, I hope you all had a great Halloween. It was the best Halloween I've had in a long time. So, I hope you're all doing okay mentally out there after the election. I know I have listeners all over the world, and I'm thankful for all of you that listen and tune in from all places. Let me grab my microphone here, get myself a little comfortable. And yeah, I am an ally. I am going to be a beacon of light in the darkness in America right now. A lot of my listeners and family members, coworkers, and friends might not see the darkness of the times ahead, but when it does come, I'm not going to say I told you so. I will just be an ear to listen, because in the future, who knows, women might not have the opportunity in America to have microphones and podcasts and be able to have a free thinking thought. So, mental health check-in. Let me know in the comments if you guys are okay. Because together we have to unite and stay strong and be the light in the darkness. So, moving forward, if you got past that, if you didn't turn this off after that, this episode is about Proscpect Place in Trinway, Ohio. I recently got to go to Proscpect Place. It's been on my bucket list for a very long time. It's about to close. They close during the winter months until spring because it's cold. It's an old house. We're going to let you know the history of it. But they have self-guided tours. And you can just go in this place. Donations accepted. Not necessary, but accepted. And you can walk the whole entire property from top to bottom. And they have a tour guide there. They have like the information on everything they have there. Gift shops. And it's really nice. But it is spooky. And there is ghost stories attached. So let's talk about the history of the Proscpect Place. So we're going to go to Wikipedia real quick just to get some keynotes. Proscpect Place is known as Trinway Mansion and Proscpect Place Estate. It's a 29-room mansion built by abolitionist George Wilson Adams, G.W. Adams, in Trinway, Ohio, just north of Dresden in 1856. Today, it is the home of a nonprofit G.W. Adams Educational Center. The mansion is listed in the National Register of Historical Places and the Ohio Underground Railroad Association list of the Underground Railroad sites. This home featured a new and, for the time, revolutionary innovations. It had indoor plumbing. That was the first house in Ohio at that time to have indoor plumbing. Okay, so it was fancy for its time. Very, very fancy. So it also had pressurized water running throughout the house, 2 coal stoves, had copper tanks under pressure from the cistern system, which heated water and allowed the home to have both hot and cold running water. That's pretty awesome. This is the second house to stand on this foundation, though. Okay. The first house was destroyed by arson-related fire shortly after its completion. To what rumor? Maybe. Okay. I'm not saying this is true, But the Native Americans that were already there, this was their land, remember, okay? We're all immigrants here on America. So when the first house that was built here, the arson fire was the natives setting fire to the house because they built a house on their land. Okay, so the interior walls of the current house are solid brick, and there is 2-inch layer of mortar, see, Ohio accent, between the first and second floors of the house to block fires. Proscpect Place is also featured in a unique refrigeration system to cool milk, cheese, and butter. A primitive form of air conditioning was created by bringing cool basement air into the living quarters during the summer months, with ducts on the outside walls. It's really elaborate for its time in that late of the 1800s. So let's talk about G.W. Adams, okay? He has a very interesting history, and if he heard about what's going on in America today, he'd be so upset, okay? So born in Fauquier, okay. Looks like that Shrek guy's Farquhar, Lord Farquaad. That's what it looks like. Anyway, it's a county in Virginia. In 1799, he was born to George Beale Adams and his wife Anna Turner. John W. Adams was one of 13 children. His father was a plantation owner who gave up his land and home to move away from their slave-holding South. They did not like having slaves, okay? The family migrated to southeastern Ohio in 1808, so they brought their slaves from Virginia with them to Ohio, freed all their slaves, let them all go, and settled in Madison Township, Muskingum County, near the town of Dresden, Ohio. Just like his father, G.W. Adams became a strong abolitionist. He and his brother Edward ran an underground railroad station from their mill at what later became known as Adams Mills, Ohio. Look it up, okay? All true. G.W. Adams was once a member of the Ohio General Assembly. Together with several of prominent citizens, Adams formed a stock company to build suspension bridge across the Muskingum River near Dresden. When the other members of the company became fearful of the plan that was not feasible and that they would lose their money, Adams built the bridge on his own expenses. His nephew, George Copeland, was the engineer. The bridge operated as a toll bridge for several years before Adams eventually sold the bridge to the county commissioners for 1/3 of the original cost of the bridge. Later in life, Adams was president of the Steubenville and Indiana Railroad. He directed construction of the Cincinnati and Muskingum Valley Railroad, and his holdings totaled to 14,500 acres, with the Proscpect Place mansion in the center of his plantation. G.W. Adams was an important figure in Ohio politics. The Underground Railroad in regional development of the southeastern Ohio area. His importance in these areas were the criterion used to include Proscpect Place Mansion in the National Register of Historic Places. G.W. Adams married twice. He married Clarissa Hopkins Schaff, 1824 to 1853. And in 1845, they had 4 children together, Edward Adams, Anna T. Adams Cox, Mary Adams, and Elizabeth Adams. After the death of his first wife, he married Mary Jane Robinson, 1932 to 1915, or 1832 to 1915. In 1855, they had 6 children together: Sophia Adams, James Adams, John Adams, Charles Adams, Jesse Adams, and Florence Adams. G.W. died on August 31st, 1879, at the age of 79. He is buried in Dresden County Cemetery in Dresden, Muskingum County, Ohio. So, a little bit about the Underground Railroad. Just a quick Wikipedia, because we're going to go to my notes on this other page. The Underground Railroad operation conducted by G.W. Adams and his brother Edward was a huge undertaking. The brothers operated a flouring mill, like flour for like bread and stuff, and on the Ohio and Erie Canal and owned warehouses, a boatyard, and copper shops in Dresden, Ohio. When men from the Adams County or the Adams Company would take flour to New Orleans down in Louisiana, they would return with refugees in our own country. Remember that. Don't let history repeat itself. So they hid the refugees in the decks of their boats, and they were hiding underneath the flour sacks. It's also known that in 1856, Adams donated money to American Colonization Society. Okay? So now we have the history of the Underground Railroad and G.W. Adams. All right? The ground was broken for the mansion, and hundreds of laborers were hired. The family watched from the little wooden house as a great brick edifice arose from the fields on the knolls of the earth of the north. 3 stories it rose, 2-story wing, most another house unto itself. For the servants grew to the north, and the cupola crowned the top. I'm hoping I'm saying cupola. It's like almost like a tower on top of the house. If you've ever seen pictures of Proscpect Place, it's like 2 side-by-side brick houses, pretty much it looks like, side by side. One's bigger than the other, and then it has these like 4 turrets on top, and then a big room with windows all the way around it on top. That's the cupola. That has a very important part to this story, okay? The cupola crowning the top. Glowing copper panels form the roof, and brightly colored paint trim the ornate gingerbread pericots. Sooner than anyone thought possible, the house was complete. It stood glowing in the summer sun of 1856, a testimony in brick to the community and family that made it happen. The night before the family was to move into the house caught fire and burned to the ground. A bucket brigade arrived too late and could not get near the inferno because the heat was too strong. Some people say an elderly Native American woman she yelled out Satan and burned the house because it had sat atop of a burial ground of her people, the Shawnee. So apparently this house is built on top of an Indian burial ground. The more likely explanation is that of a bricklayer on the project named George Blackburn. Blackburn was a notorious character, okay? When he was not robbing or plundering or working as a bricklayer in the Dresden area, he just went to house looking for extra work, usually robbing people blind or setting houses on fire, supposedly. But allegedly, he bragged in a drunken stupor to someone in Dresden of having burned the mansion in order to generate more work for himself. George W. Adams heard of this and promptly had Mr. Blackburn arrested and sent to the Columbus Penitentiary. Blackburn had helped build the prison and was able to escape soon after. He helped build the prison, and then he was able to escape. He returned to Muskingum County, where he met his end through splitting an axe he attempted to rob in the area of now is called Ellis Dam. Okay. There's some important information that has been found on this legend. The supposed Proscpect Place arsonist, George Blackburn. Plagued by questions and doubts surrounding this chapter of the mansion lore, a board member and super sleuth Jonathan Robson digs into the historic records and learns more about the enigmatic and dangerous, not so good doer. So here's what he found. It is also cited by several individuals online, like me, being factual, and has made George Blackburn a part of mansion lore. However, the trustees have uncovered new information that dispels part of the legend and will bring new information to light in the notorious outlaw. In the article, an unnamed victim of theft, the farmer defending himself with the axe against George Blackburn mortally wounds Blackburn. Before succumbing to his wounds, George Blackburn supposedly confessed to burning down Proscpect Place. We were unable to confirm this. To contrary, we heard we learn that George Blackburn actually died of heart disease while in the Ohio State Penitentiary. Newspaper articles found about George Blackburn state that his first notable crime offense occurred when he was involved in a safe-blowing incident at the flour mill in Wallading, Ohio, approximately 25 north of this place. Blackburn and 2 accomplices were later captured for an incident when he was sentenced to 10 years at the Ohio State Penitentiary. Blackburn actually escaped from the local jail before he could be transported to Columbus, but was recaptured a few weeks later. Microfilm of this incident was discovered in the Ohio State Penitentiary archives, and Blackburn's name appears to be directly beside both of his accomplices for the incident. It's important to note that the description of his trade listed at the penitentiary is bricklayer, and that he had a wife and children at the time living in Dredson. He received a pardon from the governor in 1863. In 1864, arrested for burglary but escaped the confines of jail in Newark. Once again, he fell into the clutches of the law in 1866. So, Blackburn's next offense was robbing a wealthy farmer around Zanesville, Ohio, when he stole like $300 from this guy. The partner gave him away, and Blackburn was convicted and sentenced to 7 years, again in jail. So he escaped from Ohio State Penitentiary for the final time September 5th, 1895. He keeps escaping from prison. This is hilarious. He had been working on an ice house for the institution that was located outside the prison walls. He was considered a trustee prisoner at the time and was not under direct supervision. At the time of his escape, Blackburn was 75 years old and had served over 35 years of his life behind bars. Blackburn once again was captured and once again returned to the prison on October 14th, 1895. Blackburn died at the Ohio State Penitentiary on April 15th, 1896, from heart disease. Body was interned at the Green Lawn Cemetery shortly after. Did George Blackburn work on the original Proscpect Mansion? Every indication suggests yes, he did. Did Blackburn torch the nearly completed Proscpect Place in order to make additional work for himself? Probably. Did Blackburn confess to the arson of Proscpect Place Mansion? Rumors, hearsay evidence suggests that he may have bragged about it to his friends and neighbors, but records indicate that he was never charged with it. So, that's the 100% facts on the burning of the originals. So, I don't know what maybe that's why they put that extra layer of mortar in between the floors for like a fire barrier. So, Proscpect Place. The name George Adams gave his mansion as it was to be the prospect of better future. It was immediately rebuilt. The second version was identical to the first in every single way and stood on the very same foundation. The family lived there for many years and were very, very happy. Mary gave George 2 wonderful children in his new home, John J. and Sophia Adams. George was a great abolitionist like his father before him. He became active in what later became known as the Underground Railroad. In the 1840s, he became a conductor, often sending some men to retrieve refugees. Originally, the mill is said to have been used as a station, but as Civil War seemed to be more likely, as in the 1850s, went along, George and Edward, his brother, decided to move the operation to George's new home. Thus, his business would not be endangered, and happenings and operations of the station would be more secret. The tunnel. Although the popular myth of the area maintains that there was an underground tunnel in the basement of Proscpect Place, the reality is that the restoration project has yet to discover one. There is a subfloor pit refrigeration system that could easily be mistaken for a tunnel and could have been used for an emergency egress in case of a home invasion by bounty hunters. In the case of the Underground Railroad, the more underground simply refers to the activity. It doesn't always denote that the presence of an actual tunnel. Although some homes did indeed have tunnels and hidden passageways, Proscpect Place seems unfortunately not to be like that. It's likely that many abolitionist meetings took place in the gentleman's parlor of the Proscpect Place in 1850s and the 1860s. It's also likely that Mr. Nelson T. Grant may have been a regular guest. Mr. Grant was a former Virginia slave from London County who had been given his freedom on the death of his master. Mr. Grant had moved to Ohio and started an orchard and coal mining operation in Zanesville. From these ventures, he became a millionaire and a very important local conductor of the Underground Railroad. Though local and family lore suggest Abraham Lincoln was also a visitor to the mansion, we have yet to sustain this legend, though. So, 60. Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Although in his personal sentiment and strong abolitionist, he was politically sitting on the fence. He knew that he was an unpopular president and it would take only a little provocation to start a civil war. He feared it was coming. There was, in the end, little Abe could do to prevent this. And shortly after this inauguration in South Carolina became the first state to succeed from the Union, thus causing a domino effect until the Southern Confederacy was formed. It's important to note that this time in our history, it was an American defining moment. It was the time in which the crucible of freedom played out to its most important act, when the notion that all men are created equal was put to the test. George Adams was a great supporter of the Union cause. It is known that he gave a great deal of money to the government during the 1860s. It's rumored that the doors of the Proscpect Place were open to any Union officer or man in transit in his part of the country, and that there may have been plans for the home to become a regional headquarters for the Union Army in the event of the Confederate invasion in Ohio. Luckily, Ohio was safe, but for the most part, from the Confederacy. But Ohio and Dresden did more than their share to preserve the Union and ensure freedom in America. A trip to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, or in any other Civil War battlefield cemetery will show more than a small number of grave markers proudly displaying Ohio as a state of the soldier who departed in the field in such an honor as death for his country. The Civil War finally ended after more and more blood had spilled on our own soil than had been believed in 1861. Battle after bloody battle had destroyed the lives of so many Americans, both North and South, in order to prove America a free nation. In the new age to come, the South would be reconstructed, and the wounds of our people would start to heal. Never again would one man hold another in fetters in America. Slavery was dead. This is not the end the struggle of the African American for civil rights, nor did it end the bigotry of the intolerance, but it was a beginning down the road. Some historians say that we still fight the Civil War to this day with words and ideas instead of guns and cannon. Let's hope it stays to words and ideas. The celebration in Dresden, mostly paid for by George W. Adams, was said to have lasted for nearly 2 weeks. This community greeted the end of the war without equal. The joy over the end of the war was tempered for the community soon after, though, as the news of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln reached Ohio. This tragedy saddened the nation, which was left to take solace in Mr. Lincoln's words written after Gettysburg, that the dead should not have died in vain, that the nation shall, under God, have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. Let that sink in for a minute. Okay, let that sink in just for a minute. So the post-war era for the Adams family, the years after the war, were good. Anna, the eldest daughter, married William Cox, Jr., a young man from Riverdale Mansion next door. Riverdale was originally built by Jonathan Cass, a Revolutionary veteran from New Hampshire, had been sold by William Cox family in the early 19th century. William Cox Sr. was the Irish-born English Army officer who had given up his commission in order to move to the United States for freedom and opportunity. George became involved in last years of his life in the railroad industry. He became the director of the Steubenville, Indiana Railroad and was both the owner and the director of the Cincinnati Muskingum Valley Railroad until his death in August 31st, 1879. After the death of George W. Adams, his $14 million estate was divided among his family. His wife, Mary, received $7 million and moved to Zanesville, where she's from, and lived in an Italian-type home, which currently houses the Baker Realty Company. The youngest son, John, moved with his mother. The remaining $7 million was divided equally among the children, each receiving $1 million. Proscpect Place was inherited by Anna and William Cox. Sophia, another sister, lived for the time in the house with her sister Anna. And they have all kinds of pictures of the family. There's a literal ballroom on the 3rd floor right below the cupola. We'll talk about the cupola after this. There was more than 200 people in the attendance from all over the state. This was the first time ice cream was served in Muskingum County and had been brought in on a specialty refrigeration train car. Life continued at the house for some time, and all was well. Then around the turn of the century, a terrible thing happened. Following is an exception from a local newspaper at that time. Is William Cox dead? Is the question that is at the public today. Or, if not dead, what has become of him? The mysterious disappearance of William Cox, whose country residence, Proscpect Place, located between Dredson and Trinway, is the most beautiful house in the county. It has been the theme of conversation in this community for the past week. While it's known last week that he had disappeared with no trace of him could be found, although a detective had been put on his trail, yet it had hoped that he thought he would turn up, and through respect for feelings of his family and connections, the transcript refrained from mentioning the matter in any respect. But Mr. Cox is gone, and completely as if very earth had opened up and swallowed him, in spite of every effort made to get some trace of him by his family. Mr. Cox left home on Friday, November 15th, just before noon, informing his family he was going to Zanesville for business, and he was in a hurry and he would not stop for dinner. Then he disappeared. And then this other article, it was a later article, says Mr. Cox located, seen on the streets of San Francisco. So there is a legend to this, that he was gay and he moved to San Francisco. We now believe that we have a resolution to the destiny of Mr. William Cox. A Cox family historian and geologist has informed us that she believes Mr. Cox did indeed settle in California. He had family previous to the area, as the Cox family was scattered between Ohio, Toronto, Canada, and California. And it is thought that Mr. Cox was in residence at a hotel in San Francisco when in 1906 the building was destroyed by a great earthquake and fire. Mr. Cox and many others were killed. So this is likely the end to his life. Bounty hunter shows up one day because he knows there's runaway slaves at Proscpect Place. The rumor is that either the workers for G.W. Adams or G.W. Adams himself took the bounty hunter to the barn and hung him from the loft, and his ghost is still haunting the barn. A lot of people have bad feelings around that barn, and bad things happen there a lot of times, apparitions and whatnot. And if you've seen Ghost Brothers, the cadaver dogs hit on the barn area. So it's up to you to determine if it's haunted or not. But that's a ghost story, is a bounty hunter that was asking for slaves and they killed him for it, so the slaves wouldn't get found. Another ghost story is of a child that resided at Proscpect Place. I don't know the child's name because I can't find any record of any of this being true, but this is a ghost story. She had pneumonia and she was really sick with fever and she was hallucinating. And it was in the middle of winter and there was a door or a window or something that goes out to like a roof patio. And she went out there in the middle of winter in her nightgown, hallucinating that it was like nice outside or hallucinating, who knows. And she walked right off the roof and died. That's another ghost story. A lot of people do not feel good up there on the second floor. So that's a couple of ghost stories for you. The cupola, the legend is that you can still see the light up there sometimes because they would have a lantern on to let the refugees know it was safe to run to Proscpect Place and seek shelter. They would have the lantern on. And sometimes they say when the place was empty and abandoned and in ruins, people would see that light up there. But it could have been teenagers partying. Who knows? Who knows? But that is the story of Proscpect Place. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you've ever been there, let me know how it was because I enjoyed it and I want to go back for an actual investigation. So that might be happening soon. So last month when I did the listener submitted stories, I left one out because it was kind of long. We'll do it now. So this is from Joyce. All right, Joyce. Last year in 2023, when a lot of the pandemic restrictions were lifted, my two friends and I went to the beautiful Hauer House in Akron that sits not too far from the Akron University with a sorority house nearby. I feel I should supply you with some significant background. I know. Here she goes with another story lesson. However, I feel like this background may supply some possible insight as the nature of the haunting. Not only in the house, but allegedly on the property itself. Before the house was even built, it was all Indian land. Let's face it, the Indians were the indigenous people before the settlers moved in. Thus, there may have been some possible paranormal fodder for the thought associated with the fact also. John Henry Hauer moved to the Akron house from Doylestown, Ohio in 1865 with his wife Susan Yonker Hauer. They had 3 sons. The house, actually a mansion, was constructed in 1871 and consists of 28 rooms. This is kind of similar to the Proscpect Place. Whoa! So, the Hauer family filled the capacity with lovely exotic souvenirs, artifacts from all over the world. If I had their money, I'd burn mine. Okay, that was her little intake there. We, well-traveled family. John was a miller, a reaper who processed grain, turning it into cereal. A lot of cereal, enough cereal that it made him extremely wealthy. He became known as the father of Akron industry. With the vast wealth, he needed a dwelling in keeping with his stats in the community. However, grand dwelling indeed. The building is a Victorian mansion constructed in the Second Empire of Italian style. It is a gorgeous, forgive me, but I love these kind of houses. I would never want to live in one. Too much upkeep. All right, to visit them though, John's first wife, Susan, died of many fatal illnesses and diseases that were prevalent during those years. However, Susan made John promise that he'd never marry again. A rather reasonable request. He got lonely and remarried 4 years later to a second wife, Rebecca. I mentioned this a little tidbit for a specific reason, so bear with me, please. Okay, we're bearing with you. The mansion required a lot of servants before requiring that structure be built for the house. The servants' quarters were a separate building nearby. The former servants' quarters were much later turned into a sorority house, but more on that later. John Hauer's second son, Milton Hauer, moved in with his wife and 2 children, Grace and John, many years later. In 1900, John wrote a letter to his son describing some unusual happenings, such as floating lights that were appearing in the house, and his mother witnessed. However, they didn't feel threatened by the events. The family lived in the mansion for 100 years until the last matriarch of the family, Grace, passed on and willed the entire estate to the University of Akron in 1973. It was turned into a mansion. It's been operated in that capacity since the 1980s. Here, my friends, is where it really gets interesting. The University of Akron would send 2 female students from nearby sorority houses to live and work in the museum for a year or 2. The 2 young women would get a room and board while working there, as well as keeping an eye on the place after tours closed. However, before I continue, I would like to make a tribute on the fact that the house and its paranormal activity has been documented long before this post is submitted to your podcast. One of the stories written about it was in the Book of Ohio's Paranormal Events titled It Came from Ohio, written in 2012 by James Reiner, the paranormal researcher and writer. He would go to allegedly haunted locations, interview witnesses, and try to gather his first-hand-on information. Ohio's haunted history goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War, just supplying some facts for any event you may be interested in. Okay, thank you for that. Reiner interviewed one of the 2 young women that were staying in the mansion around the 90s. The young women he interviewed, Ashley, started living in the mansion in 1998 and stayed for 2 years. She told him that she would never believed in the ghost stories associated with the place until, as usual, she had her own experiences. She claimed that she would hear persistent knocking on the inside of her closet door every night. It spooked her. She learned that a century ago, a housekeeper would lock her children in the closet to punish them. One of the children, a boy, had a hammer and would pound on the inside of the door, pleading to be let out. And the reason for knocking, she surmised. Okay? Yeah. After she learned that she slept with the closet door open, I would too. Maybe not, though. Also, her and her roommate would sit up some nights listening to someone downstairs playing the piano. They called the police once. Before the officer entered the house, he called on the radio for backup and to bring their proton packs. I just got that. He informed Ashley that it was not the first time that the police were called to that house for such disturbances, as many others that look back for decades. One night, she had her boyfriend over, and they were sitting in her room, and her boyfriend was facing the door when she noticed that his face was froze while she was talking to him. He was staring at the open door. He looked up, and they both saw an elderly woman walk by something like a long nightgown, trailing behind her. Yet they heard no footsteps. The woman they saw matched the portrait in the hallway of the matriarch of the family, Grace, the old woman that died. Somehow she was out of the portrait and walking around the house. Ashley called her friend told her that Grace didn't like men in the house, and that's why they always took in female caretakers to stay there. It came to a head when one night the ghost attacked her boyfriend. He woke her up in the night covered in sweat, and he was white as a sheet. He told her that the bed sheets were yanked up around his neck so tight as he began choking, and while he heard a female voice whispering something horrible in his ear. Ashley left shortly after that, and another woman began working there and took her place, thus adding to the long line of witnesses to the activity in the house. Holy shit. Okay. That's insane. That's insane. I wouldn't want to work there. Nope, I would not want to work there. Haunted Akron University and Museum. Wow. So, this is going to conclude our episode of Under the Moon Paranormal Ohio Legends. This episode was brought to you by Proscpect Place and apparently the Haunted Akron University Museum. Yeah, I'm going to have to do some research on that. And thank you for your story, Joyce. That was really detailed, and I believe every word of it. If you want to submit your own story, please email me at underthemoonparapod@gmail.com, and I will read your story on the show. If you guys have topic suggestions, you can email me those too. You can also check me out on my sister podcast, Explain Strange Podcast by Slap Recon Productions. Catch us on Facebook Lives and on YouTube. Just search Explain Strange Podcast. Plus, I'll leave a description in the show notes of this show. Well, the holidays are coming. Mercury retrograde's coming. And hopefully America doesn't go back to the 1850s. And I can keep doing this podcast. All right, you guys. Peace, love, and stay spooky.